This video is brought to you by Squarespace, an online platform where you can create your very own website, blog, or online shop. Hi everyone, in this video we are filling a sketchbook page with a painting. It's an actual full-blown painting that kind of surprised me, and I think the moral of this video is to trust the process and don't rush yourself and think things through, and don't be afraid to take breaks when you're doing a painting. That being said, I am not extremely happy with the way it turned out, but I think the process was a lot of fun, and I think it was overall a good experience working in my sketchbook on this piece. Basically, I decided to take my stone garden characters and I started sketching one on a page in a sort of scene that I've had in my mind for a while. I didn't plan it out at all, which always makes it a lot harder to do paintings like this. I didn't know I was going to be doing a full-blown painting. I call it more of a sketchy painting, just seeing where it can go and trying to push the sketch as far as I can. And then afterwards I scanned it into my iPad and tried to push it even further, and it was just one big trust the process experiment, and I think the result is kind of interesting. It's not perfect. I always recommend, if you're trying to do a nice painting, especially traditionally, it's really helpful to do a bunch of thumbnail sketches and figure out the composition and do some color studies and some value studies so you know where you want everything to be, instead of doing trial and error when it comes to the final painting. Painting is hard enough, but when you have to figure out what colors you're going to put where as you're painting it and you don't have a blueprint to work off of, it just makes it so much more difficult. But I started off this sketchbook page by doing a bunch of little doodles of the stone garden guys to sort of hopefully warm up, and I didn't really know what I was doing. I felt a bit aimless, but I knew that I wanted to use my new Caran pastels because I recently ordered a bunch of new colors. I had a lot before, and I kind of went through and looked at all the colors that I don't have, and I ordered them all, and now I have I think I have pretty much all the colors now. I have the neocolour 2s, so they are water soluble, which I was trying to play around with, but I am still actively working on a technique that works for me with these, and I think 2025 will be a year of me trying to use new media and maybe embracing traditional art a little bit more. That was one of my resolutions, and I ended up sort of doing it by accident in this video. I ended up doing 2 of my resolutions in this video, which is doing more traditional paintings and drawing things that have more of a concept or purpose. I wouldn't say this piece is hugely concept focused, but it does take one of my characters that I used to draw all the time, which is different than just drawing an animal. So I think that sort of goes along with my resolution of wanting to do more world building and weirder stuff, not just doing a landscape with an animal, but thinking about the world and the characters and what exists in the world and what I'm trying to portray in the scene. And one of the things that I regretted about this starting point was making him kind of look like he's T-posing almost. He's just sitting there, not in any particular pose at all, but I figured I can always play around with it digitally and move stuff around and really see where I can take it digitally. This is such an experiment. I was just sort of trusting the process and seeing what would happen if I did an underpainting in just earthy tones, because I wanted to figure out where I wanted the lighting to be. And honestly, it was kind of a mess, but I was just willing to see what I could do with it and where I could take it without any plans, purely just for practicing, experimenting, not being afraid to make mistakes. And I think whenever I do stuff like this, I have there's a big danger of me overworking it, and I definitely got close to that. I ended up taking so long on this. I don't know how much footage I had. I think I had 3 hours of footage, but I probably worked on it for 4 hours and then took it digitally. And that's the thing about not planning out stuff. It ends up taking so much longer, for me anyways, and I end up being less happy with the result. But this was just a spur of the moment. Let's just see what happens. Let's just draw some plants, try out my new supplies, and it was pretty fun. So after I did the watercolor base I took my pastels, as you can see, and I tried to sort of color on top of that, and I used some pencil as well, and I was just trying to embrace the texture, and I was trying to pick out my like most earthy tones and my most realistic looking like green colors. The thing about these types of materials is that you can't mix the colors yourself. You're sort of limited to what colors you have that are already pre-made, and with watercolor you can mix anything you want, but I guess with these you can also layer colors on top of each other and they can turn into new colors. I think I figured out a lot of stuff with this little colorful sketch. I think it was like a good learning experience, and I want to do more things like this, but I want to plan them out a little bit. Like I'll do a page before of some like little thumbnails, figuring out roughly where I want colors and what I want stuff to look like. Now for a quick break to thank this video's sponsor, which is Squarespace. I'm very excited to be partnering with Squarespace in 2025, and since it's the new year, maybe it's time to finally create that website you've been thinking of, or a blog, or an online store. Squarespace has so many tools for you to get started. I would first recommend browsing through all of their pre-made templates, or using Squarespace Blueprint, where you can customize a template to suit your needs, and from there you can change so many things about your site. You can change the color scheme, the fonts, the size of fonts, add pages, add images, add a gallery to your site, which is what I like to do since I'm an artist. If you would like full flexibility to design a page how you want, you can take advantage of their Fluid Engine editor. And basically this means you can import elements onto the page like an image, text, whatever it might be, and drag and drop them, and they will automatically snap to a grid, but you still have that flexibility of moving stuff where you want them to be. To try out Squarespace, go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, make sure to use my code JelArts, or go to squarespace.com/JelArts for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. It might seem like planning things out can take more time because you're like taking that extra step to draw out thumbnails and decide what you want things to look like before you move on to your final painting, but it actually saves you a lot of time in the long run because it takes the guesswork out of things, and I just can't stress that enough. And I wish I did that for this painting, but I didn't really know I was going to be doing like a full-blown painting like this, or like a full page spread that's a little more involved and more detailed. And also I think the paper in this sketchbook, I really like it, don't get me wrong, but it's not the thickest paper, so once you start adding layers and layers of media, it starts to warp and crinkle a little bit. And I think if I was using one of my like watercolor sketchbooks that I used to use, I have one on standby for when I'm done this sketchbook. I'm going to switch to that one with like thicker paper, and I think once I'm using that sketchbook, it's going to be really fun to have that like toothy texture again. It's fun to change things up. Like usually I use more like toothy mixed media sketchbooks, but this Royal Talons art creation sketchbook has been kind of a breath of fresh air to like try something new. But I think like switching to a more heavyweight and durable paper will be also a breath of fresh air after this one. But I still like to do what I can on the page, and I added so many layers of media. I'll tell you what I did, like the order of operations. It started with watercolor. I use a lot of browns for the underpainting. Then I went in with the pastels and pencil, which I consider like dry media. The pastels are kind of wet media because you can add water, but if you don't, then they're dry, but they're definitely more of like a soft, dry type of media, and pencils are more drier than that. Like the pastels go on a lot easier than the pencils, but they're both still dry media. And after I was done with the pastels and the pencil, I broke out my acrylic markers. This is truly a mixed media piece. It's like every media in the book I used on this, and I don't know why it was taking so long. I just like couldn't create what I was envisioning in my head, so I just kept adding and adding and adding and changing things and adding things, and eventually it just becomes too much. Like you're not really making meaningful impacts on the piece anymore, and like it'd be faster to start over. But I just wanted to keep putting media on the page and I was enjoying it, so I just kept going. Using the acrylic markers is a really nice fast way to add sort of highlights and opaque color on top. But then I decided, you know what, I'm gonna use my gouache, and I'm gonna use my acrylic gouache because I never use acrylic gouache. I think I just kind of decided that I prefer regular gouache for so many different reasons. I should make a video about it, but the main reason why I prefer regular gouache is you sort of feel like you're not racing against the clock and worrying about your paint drying on your palette. And I always feel like I have to hurry when I'm using acrylic gouache because you cannot reactivate it with water. You kind of have one chance with the color that you're mixing. And there are ways to preserve the wetness of the paint. You can use a stay wet palette, which I wanted to do, and I have one for painting minis, but I didn't remember that I had it before I started, so it was kind of too late. But a stay wet palette, you can wet this like sponge thing and close the lid, and it kind of keeps your paint moist for a really long time, and it's actually pretty cool. I would recommend getting one of those if you use paint that dries permanently, but I just didn't remember I had that for this. So acrylic gouache dries permanently on the palette, but regular gouache, you can reactivate it with water, and I eventually broke out a couple palettes that I used a long time ago that has dried gouache on it, and it was regular gouache, and I just added water and I could rework it and use those colors that I hadn't used yet. And I just feel like it sort of takes the pressure off from like mixing the exact right color. You can go back to colors you used a long time ago in the piece and reactivate them and add them on instead of mixing everything from scratch all the time. I just really like regular gouache. I think I also need to give like really good quality acrylic gouache a chance. I bought like a cheaper version of acrylic gouache, the Turner gouache, and they're okay, but honestly, I don't really like them that much. I much prefer the Holbein gouache. It's that really popular gouache that you see a lot of artists use, and I used one of them in this video, but I don't have them in all the primaries. At least I don't think I do. But eventually I just simplified it, and I took out my primary regular gouache set where I use cyan, magenta, yellow, black, and white, and you can make any color you want from those colors. I love that set. It's like my favorite. It's what got me into gouache, and I still love it to this day. I think it's so worth it spending the extra money to get something high quality, because you end up like, it's easier to work with. It's easier to mix colors, it's so much more pigmented, and it goes a longer way because it's so high quality. You don't need to use so much of it to get enough of the pigment on the page. So I just had a lot of fun just playing around, experimenting, using gouache. I think I really want to use gouache more often. I tried to make it easier for myself by getting like a empty takeout container, like one of those ones that usually have like soup and things like that, a short one. And I put my favorite gouache colors in a Ziploc bag in the container and then sealed the container, because it's really good to put gouache in a plastic bag or some kind of airtight container because the tubes will dry out on their own. It's happened a lot to me in the past, and I'm trying to prevent it. So last time I stored them, I put them in a Ziploc bag, and then I put them in a plastic container that's meant to hold like photos. And it just like limits the airflow around the tubes of paint, and they were successfully preserved and they did not dry out. So I'm really glad I did that. And that is a pro tip that someone told me in my comments, and I was like, that makes so much sense. I really should be doing that with my paint. I don't have this issue with acrylic paint. It's something about regular gouache that I have this issue with. Like, this hasn't happened with my Turner gouache, but it always happens with my Holbein gouache. I don't know why that is, it's very weird. But if you find your paint tubes drying out frequently, you should try to seal them in a container and make sure it's airtight. I also wanted to show you what I did after I scanned this into my iPad. I was determined to get it to a place that I really liked, but I don't know. I think I'm gonna have to sit on it for a little bit, but I wanted to show you what I've done so far. So this is like a little speed paint in Procreate, which is a software on my iPad that I do all my digital work with. And I'm using my own brushes with my own textures, and I'm able to pretty like seamlessly blend the digital and traditional together. And I think taking an existing traditional painting and bringing it into digital software and painting over it, you can really fine-tune the piece to be exactly how you envisioned it in your mind. There's so much flexibility with digital art. Of course, the downside is that you don't have the original piece in the physical realm, but it's still just as valid because it's art at the end of the day, and you drew it and you made it and it came from your mind and from your hands. And that's what I'm trying to tell myself, because sometimes I feel bad that I can't achieve what I wanted on paper, but it's because I wasn't expecting to do a painting. It was kind of a spur of the moment, and I just wanted to see what I could do on my iPad. So I hope you enjoyed seeing this process for this little stone garden guy. Drawing this really made me want to do more traditional stuff. I really hope I can keep it up in 2025 and keep doing traditional work. and a commenter gave me a good idea. Instead of like painting on individual sheets of paper, I should find some kind of like watercolor pad or book, or like a high quality sketchbook that's dedicated to final pieces. So if I like something, I can sort of like cut it out of the book and have it as its own painting. I think that would take the pressure off of doing finished pieces, because you sort of have that sketchbook mindset if you're drawing in a book, and it feels a little more casual. So I really want to try that this year, and I have a couple of options of booklets that I can use for that. Let me know if you currently have a sketchbook and what kind of art you do in it. Do you ever do bigger paintings like this, like more finished looking stuff or more sketchy stuff, or do you do a mix of both? I tend to do a mix, I think. Thanks again for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.